In our series with the encounters with Jesus, we have seen over the weeks how encounters with Jesus subvert our expectations and speak to us about who Jesus is. And what this does is actually brings about a range of emotions and a range of responses, some which are good, some which are not so good. And our reading today is no exception, and it comes contextually, it comes within a run of encounters with Jesus, which seem to speak about the authority of Jesus through some sort of quite remarkable miracles, really, at this point. The first story in this run, Jesus calms the storm by simply saying, "Quiet, be still," leading the disciples to ask, "Who is this?" And the story, it shows really that Jesus is the Lord over nature. And if you followed the news recently regarding the England game over the last few days, FIFA are probably wishing that they are lords over nature too, so that they can hold off the possible storm that is meant to happen around the same time as kickoff. And I wonder how many fans, should the storm come, might try to follow in Jesus' example and be stood in the stands saying, "Quiet, be still." Yeah, quite something to see, wasn't it? But that's the sort of situation that they were in, and Jesus just stopped that storm in the moment, which is something which we just cannot do as humans. And then if you go on to the next story, we looked at this one a couple of weeks ago, the man who was demon-possessed. We see in that story the demons, they fear Jesus. And they also answer the disciples' question from the previous story, and they say that he is the Son of the Most High God. And then after that they flee the man into a set of pigs. And this leads to the crowds to fear Jesus and ask for him to leave. And in this story we see that Jesus, he is the Lord over the demons. And then in this passage today, we see Jesus has been welcomed after being driven away. And we see two miracles, which actually they don't have much description of response. There seems to be excitement in Jesus being present and in what he is doing. And we are told there was astonishment in the reactions. But other than that, that's sort of a response that we get. And what we see are two miracles which are intertwined into this story. One was the healing of the bleeding woman, and the other was the raising of Jairus' daughter from death. And these, they show that Jesus is Lord over sickness and even Lord over death. So the first miracle is of the woman who would have been in a desperate situation and an outcast due to this bleeding, and it's been there for 12 years, we are told. It seemed that she was unhealable. At least that was the case to other healers, and it was likely she would have gone to other healers as well. She, in desperation, touched Jesus' cloak, and his power healed her. And I think because many of us know this story quite well, it is maybe a story which is maybe slightly trivialized and downplayed in our minds. But this miracle, it should really create a wow moment for us. This woman, she would have likely had been to the spiritual healers of the day and had found herself not healed. She maybe would have gone to the sort of the normal physicians of the day as well, and they maybe would have attempted to heal her. And yet, we see in verse 43, it tells us that no one could heal her. Sorry, 43 in, I think it's Matthew, I missed the gospel in my script. But no one could heal her. And yet, just by the touch of Jesus' cloak, she was healed. She'd been unwell for 12 years. Imagine being in that position yourself, being told by multiple doctors today that there was nothing they could do to heal you from a sickness which prevented you from living your desired life. Some here may have a bit of that experience with medical conditions that you go through or in your family. And yet here, a sickness that is unhealable, Jesus is able to heal. It's quite remarkable to be in that moment. And for Jesus, there was no fancy ritual. There was no remarkable deed performed, but simply a touch of Jesus' cloak, out of desperation and in faith of this Jesus who she had heard about. Another remarkable detail is that Jesus knew there was this specific touch and a miracle was performed. The disciples thought Jesus was being a little silly. Lots of people were crowding around him, and they were probably touching him and bumping into him. So why was he looking for a specific person? And yet, despite this busyness, despite the numbers of people, he sought out the person who was the outcast, sought out the person who was desperate, the person who was humble. The crowds wouldn't have been interested in this lady, and yet Jesus was. Often we encounter Jesus from out of the depths. Psalm 130, right at the start, says, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." And there are so many testimonies of people meeting Jesus in times of desperation, where they have no hope left other than a glimmer of possibility that there is a God which they have heard about. And it's in this moment, in this encounter, through faith, that this woman is healed of her sickness, and these people who cry out to God in desperation, that they encounter Jesus and their lives are turned around. Generally speaking, certainly in religious contexts, there is this idea of superstition and ritual to try and coax a healing. And sometimes there's a passing of money as well. I recently saw an advert for a clairvoyant being advertised to come and have your readings done. Come and, speak to the people who have passed away, whatever it may be. Come and have these readings. And it cost you £25 a reading. Yet Jesus, just by a woman's faith, who thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. She was healed. There was no scam, no nonsense, just a faith-filled encounter with Jesus. And it's an encounter that teaches us that Jesus is Lord and King over all sickness. By his power, not by a perfected formula or incantation, but by his power alone, the sickness was gone. And then we come to the next story. We get Jairus' daughter, who was unwell, but died before Jesus could get there because he was in the midst of the encounter with this woman. And Jairus was told that there's no point bothering Jesus now. Death is certainly the one thing that cannot be treated. But Jesus responds by saying, "Do not be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." What a statement to make. Jairus has just been told that she has died. And when he told those who were mourning that she is not dead but asleep, they laughed at him. People, certainly in those times, people knew when somebody was dead. It wasn't really in doubt. It is possible as well that some of those mourners, you sometimes hear people talk about this, some of those mourners, they were there as part of their job. There were people who used to get paid to be mourners when somebody died, so they may have been there for that purpose. And again, if that was the case, they certainly would have known as part of their job that this person was dead, a bit like, I guess, undertakers maybe today. But Jesus, he goes in with Peter, John and James and says, "My child, get up." And it says her spirit returned and she stood up. She who was dead is now alive. And it's yet another impossible thing for the ordinary person to deal with, to be able to cure, to sort out. And yet Jesus, just through a simple command, was able to deal with it. Even the greatest of faith healers with all their rituals cannot overcome death. They couldn't deceive people about death. Death was just one thing that was definitely impossible. And yet, just like with the storm, Jesus just spoke a simple word. He said here, little girl, get up. With the storm, he said, quiet, be still. And the miracle happened. And I think it is really easy for us to gloss over the significance of that. He's not ran and got a defibrillator. He's not burnt sage or whatever it is some of these faith healers might do in the hope that it might work. He's not gone and performed a ritual. He's not asked for £25 and he'll see what he can do. He's not done any of that. He has just spoken simple words. Little girl, get up. Just as he spoke to that storm, he spoke and the dead girl woke up. That's quite an encounter with Jesus. And it also shows a remarkable level of authority. The closest thing I could think of as an example of this is sometimes you get people who are teachers and they say like that teacher doesn't even need to raise his voice because actually they hold authority over their class. That teacher doesn't have to shout at them. They can just speak and the class will listen. You sometimes hear that, very rare occasions you hear of teachers like that. And that's the closest I could think of this authority that Jesus has here. He's not having to shout at them, and he's not having to do X, Y, Z. He's just spoke quietly and he's been listened to. And even here, death has listened to Jesus and said, okay, I'm gone. And this girl lives. In this moment, Jesus is showing that he is even Lord and King over the one inevitability of life, that is death. Not one of us can escape that fact even today, that we will experience death. Yet Jesus, our Saviour, is Lord and King over that. In the community where Jesus is Lord and King, we know that he is not only our King, but that he is king over nature, as we saw in the storm, that he is king over the demons, as we saw in the story about the demoniac, and he is king over sickness, and he is king over death. What a remarkable king that we have in this community here at St. Michael's. All these things are things that we have minimal control over. There are little things we can do maybe to help occasionally, but ultimately, as humans, we have minimal control. Just think of the chaos that the recent pandemic caused, or that climate change is apparently going to cause, and that we seem to have little control over, or even the potential of that storm at the World Cup. But they're just like, well, we're going to have to change the match time. There's nothing else we can do. And then even that's caused chaos trying to change the time of the match, and so they've gone back to the original time. All these things we have little control over, and yet Jesus is Lord and King over these things. That is who our King is. And one day, when Jesus returns, nature will no longer work against us or be a threat. Demons will no longer torment us. Sickness will be no more. And death, which is already defeated on the cross in Jesus Christ, will no longer affect us. We shall be living in eternity with our God and King. So as a church and as a community, we should have confidence in the power of Jesus Christ. And we should stand in awe before him, because all of these things are subject to him. At his words, the chaos of life will be stilled. He's not just a good and impressive person. He is far beyond that. He is the Lord and King over all things, even death. Our response then, as a church, as individuals who believe in Jesus Christ, and as a community, when we encounter Jesus and declare him our King, is surely to worship him. Because what else can we do? We've got someone who is Lord and King over nature, over demons, over sickness, and even over death. What else can we do to honour him? All we can do is worship him. Not because it is our duty, but because our hearts are so overcome by his nature, so overcome by his power and might. He is the miracle-working King who controls the waves, and for Daves, but who controls the waves, who demons fear and obey, who heals incurable sickness by just a touch, and even gives life to the dead. We were all once spiritually dead and are made alive in Jesus Christ, our King. The community Jesus creates is the one where he is King. He is making a community that honors and worships him, who acknowledges he is King, and he'll give that community life. It unites us as a church in worship of him, and we can have confidence in our King because he is King over all these things. And we can see these stories of him in the Bible, and we hear testimonies today of Jesus still doing these things today. I know who I want as King, and that is Jesus, the King who is King even over death, King over sickness, King over nature, King over demons. Nothing this world can throw at me can overthrow our King. That's who I would want as King, and I hope that's who you want as King too. And we're going to respond in a moment, and I think the only real response to this is to worship our King, King Jesus, who is a King above it all, who is the King who has called you his own, called you to follow him, called you to be the children of God, and to go and proclaim the message he has, that his kingdom has come. His kingdom where death is defeated and will be no more. That's the kingdom he has called you to be a messenger of. So let us come now to a time of worship. And as the worship group get ready, let us pray.